Good evening, everyone. It's now 6:30, and I call to order the regular meeting of the Victoria City Council. Please join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The first item on our agenda tonight is announcements. The City Council will hold its first budget workshop already, friends. The City Council will hold its first budget workshop of the year on Monday, June 26th at 5:30 p.m. During the workshop, Council will discuss the preliminary 2024 budget. All meetings of the City Council are open to the public and held in the council chambers at City Hall unless otherwise noted. If you're interested in speaking at a council meeting, we encourage you to contact our city clerk for more information. In other announcements, on Thursday, May 18th, first responders are hosting Fishing with First Responders. 2 sessions will be held at Lake Auburn Fishing Pier. Group A is 5 to 6:30 p.m., and Group B will start from 6:45 to 8:15 p.m. Registration is online, and registration for this event ends Thursday, May 11th, and I'm assuming online at the city website. Yes. And the last announcement here, the City Council will recognize the city's volunteers and outgoing Citizen Advisory Board members, and will also present the 2023 Community Builder Award during our annual Volunteer Appreciation event. This special event will begin at 5 p.m. on Monday, June 12th, and it will be held at Bayfront Park in downtown Victoria. Our next order, there are no proclamations this evening, and our next order of business is to adopt the final agenda. Council, can I get a motion to adopt the final agenda?
Motion to adopt final agenda?
I have a motion. Can I get a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. We'll move on to the next item on our agenda, which is open forum. Open forum is the opportunity for anyone to address the council on an item that is not on the agenda and not in application form that will be coming to the council at a future date. Please don't expect action from the council this evening regarding your comments. Council members may ask clarifying questions, but open forum is not intended to be a back and forth discussion. No one has registered to speak at open forum this evening, but if there's anyone in the audience who would like to address the item, address the council on an item that's not on the agenda and not in application form that will be coming to the council at a future date, please let me know now. Seeing no one, we'll move on to the next item on our agenda, which is the consent agenda. Items on the consent agenda are routine, administrative, and do not require deliberation or housekeeping items required by law. They're approved with one vote unless someone requests an item to be considered separately. Ms. Hardy, does staff wish to pull any consent agenda items for separate discussion and vote this evening?
None from staff, Madam Mayor.
Is there any council member who would like to pull an item from the consent agenda? Anyone in the audience looking to pull an item from the consent agenda? Seeing no one, I will take a motion to adopt the consent agenda.
I'll make a motion to adopt the consent agenda for our meeting this evening.
I have a motion. Can I get a second?
Second?
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Now moving on to our regular agenda. We have quite a few items on the regular agenda this evening, so we'll get right to it. Item 6.1 is our independent auditor's report for year ending 2022. Kicking us off on that this evening is Assistant City Manager and Finance Director Tricia Pollock. Ms. Pollock, welcome. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, Mayor, members of the council. The city's independent auditors from the firm MMKR have completed their audit for year ended 2022. Jacqueline Hugel, CPA, will present the results and the 2022 comprehensive annual financial report.
Ms. Hugel, welcome. Did I say that right, Hugel?
Hegel.
Hugel.
Close enough.
Sorry,
No,
thank
no,
you.
you're fine. So good evening, and thank you for having me tonight. My name is Jackie Hegel, and I am a partner at MMKR, and here to present the audit results for the year ended December 31st, 2022. It's hard to believe that another year has already gone by and another audit. But just to give a little background, scope, and timing of the audit, our team is out here in January going over some of the preliminary fieldwork procedures And then we're back the third week in March where we complete the bulk of our final fieldwork procedures. And then from there, we're working with city staff to wrap up the final pieces and prepare that act for that annual comprehensive financial report that's in front of you, that does get submitted to the GFOA then. The first slide I have here just talks a little bit about our role as auditors. As an auditor, my role is to issue an opinion on the city's basic financial statement. One thing I will comment on that the city did not receive, they received less than $750,000 in federal awards. Just some of you are probably familiar with some of the federal ARPA dollars, the American Rescue Plan Act. If you do spend more than $750,000 in those federal awards, there's a separate audit over those specific federal dollars. So we've been seeing a lot more of those audits in local government. So I just wanted to comment on that. Your expenditures in the current year are about $425,000. So you were less than that $750,000 threshold. So there wasn't any separate specific audit of those. And then of those funds received, there's about $690,000 that is deferred for future spending still related with those federal funds. As part of our audit, then we also test the internal controls and compliance over the financial statement audit, as well as with the Minnesota Legal Compliance Audit. So each year, the Office of the State Auditor releases what's known as the Minnesota Legal Compliance Manual. And there's specific statutes in that manual that the OSA requires auditors to test for. So some years it's the same statutes. They obviously switch it up some years too, depending on what the hot topics are at the OSA from year to year. As you're going to see on this next slide, the audit results, it was overall a very good audit for the city. We issued a modified or a clean opinion on that basic financial statement. You're going to see one thing in the opinion and a change is under GASB standards. Local governments were required to implement a new standard in the current year called the lease standard. And that is relating, basically the GASB 87 lease standard establishes a single model for lease accounting for governments. So in the past, you maybe heard the terminology capital leases and operating leases. And now that's gone away and you're seeing lease liabilities, lease assets. And the one impact that you're going to see in your financials is the lessor accounting. So when you are the lessor and are leasing out space or anything like that. So that is the one impact you're going to see as you look at your financial statement. There's a lease receivable about $5 million on your financial statements, and that relates with the Victoria Rec Center ground lease with Eastern Carver County Schools and also various antenna leases with some cell phone companies. So you have a lease receivable and an offsetting deferred inflow on your financials, and you're still just recognizing the revenue each year as you receive it. But now under GASB standard, you're required to record that lease receivable upfront when you enter into any new agreement. Moving forward, the results over the internal controls over financial reporting, we had no findings to report there. No findings to report in the compliance areas, both with the financial statement audit and with that Minnesota Legal Compliance Audit. So overall, great results for the city with no findings to report for the 22 year. Moving forward then to talk about some of the financial results of the city. This first slide here summarizes the governmental funds and the fund balances from 2021 to 2022. If you're looking at that, the top part of that shows the classification of fund balance, starting with those non-spendable dollars that are restricted, committed, assigned, and unassigned. The bottom part of that table shows each of the major funds of the city separately and the non-major funds all combined together. So overall, when you're looking at your total governmental funds, you saw a decrease of about $1.7 million from the prior year. If you're looking at the top part of that table, it's all in those restricted dollars, correlates to the bottom portion of that table in the debt service. And that was mainly due to the city had refunding bonds that were issued in the prior year that were restricted, and they refunded those outstanding debt in 2022. This next slide here summarizes the general fund financial position for the past 5 years, gives some trend line information. Overall, the general fund cash ended the year at about $3.6 million, about $150,000 increase from the prior year. The city's fund balance ended the year at about $3.4 million. That was an increase of about $129,000 from the prior year, and that was compared to a budgeted increase of $143,000. So very close to what the council approved in the budget overall for the 2022 year. And at year end, that left about The unassigned fund balance was at 30% of the subsequent year's budgeted expenditures, so the city was in line with that fund balance policy, that 30% threshold. This next graph here summarizes the general fund revenues, comparing current year actual to budget. Overall, the general fund revenues are about 6.8 million, an increase of about 390,000 from the prior year, and about 190,000 over budget. A couple budget variances, if you're looking at intergovernmental revenues, there was just more police aid and some more fire grants received than were anticipated in the budget. And overall, license and permits were over budget about 60,000, just more building activity than initially anticipated. And the increase of about 390,000 from the prior year, you're seeing about a $200,000 increase in property tax revenue received, and about 100,000 in that charges for services area, with more planned check fees correlating with some of the building activity. Similar graph here, just showing the general fund expenditures. Overall general fund expenditures were about 5.5 million. That was about an increase from the prior year and very close to budget, about 5,000 over budget. So there were some budget variances just in total, looking at swings by function. But like I said, overall within 5,000 of budget, the expenditures were. But that $1 million increase from the prior year, you're seeing some increases in the general government function, mainly in the personal service areas, with some added positions in various departments within communications, financial administration, planning and zoning. And then public safety in that area, you saw some increased costs with some supplies in the fire department, as well as more personal service costs and building inspections that goes along with that building activity in the current year. This next table here, this summarizes the enterprise fund financial position. So that's your water fund, your sewer fund, and your stormwater management. Overall, look in 2021 to 22, you're seeing an increase in that net position of just under 2.8 million. Overall, very good results. You're seeing the net investment in capital assets went up about 1.5 million. That's just the continued investment in the infrastructure within the city. And then the city also receiving some developer contributions from outside developments going on. And overall, the unrestricted then up 1.2 million, which is directly related to the positive operating results in each of the water, sewer, and stormwater funds, which I have a graph specifically on each of those funds that we'll walk through here. So this first one is of the water fund. You're seeing overall in the water fund, your operating revenues were up about 200,000 compared to prior year. A lot of that was just increased consumption in the current year with more, there was also an increase in some connections in the current year. And then you saw operating expenses increase about 90,000. That was mainly in your personnel services as well as materials and supplies. So overall though, the operating income in the water fund was about 400,000. Similar graph here, just of the sewer fund, some trend data for the past 5 years. Overall, the sewer fund had operating revenue increase of about 35,000, once again due to increased consumption in the current year, similar to the water fund. And overall, the expenses were very similar to prior year, decreased slightly, about 4,700. You're going to see, looking at this fund, the fund had an operating loss of about 300,000. We do include that separate red line in the graph. You're probably aware there's depreciation on the assets. So when you back off that depreciation expense, which is kind of that paper entry that gets recorded every year to depreciate your assets, you're seeing that income then before that depreciation of just under 200,000. And then the last graph of the enterprise funds is the stormwater fund. So once again, here you're seeing your operating revenues had an increase of about 45,000 from the prior year. That was mainly due to there was a rate increase in this fund for 2022. And then overall, the operating expenses decreased about 65,000, mainly in the professional services area. And the fund ended 2022 with an operating income of about 92,000. And then the last table I have here, this summarizes what we call the government-wide financial statements. So as a local government, you look at all your individual funds, both governmental funds and enterprise funds, And there's a second reporting model called the government-wide financial statements, where all those funds roll up together. And we call them the full accrual statements, where this snapshot includes all capital asset activity of the city. It includes all long-term liabilities of the city, any type of debt, pension obligations. And it gives kind of one snapshot at year end. So looking at these government-wide financial statements, you're seeing an increase of about 6.8 million from the prior year. The top part is those governmental activities. When you're including all the capital assets, you're seeing an increase there of about 4 million, mainly in that net investment and capital asset row. And that's just, once again, more the continued investment in the infrastructure within the city, and then some of the outside developer contributions that the city receives each year. And then the business type activities increased at just under 2.8 million. And once again, that's in line with the previous few slides we just walked through with the water, the sewer, and the stormwater funds. So with that, I would open it up if there are any questions.
Thank you. Council, questions?
Thank you.
All looks great. All right, terrific. With that, I believe we need a motion to accept the report. So council, seeing no more discussion, can I get a motion?
I'll make a motion to accept the independent auditor's report for year-end 2022.
Fantastic. We have a motion. Can I get a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Ms. Higo. Thank you, Trish. Congratulations on the nice audit.
Thank you, Mayor.
Item 6.2 is an annexation request for Carver Park Reserve. Starting our presentation this evening is Fire Chief Andrew Hager, and that will be followed by our consulting city planner, Mr. Nathan First. Mr. Hager, or Chief Hager, you're up first.
All right, and good evening, Mayor and Council. I'm just going to provide you a little background on this topic and how we got to the discussion that we're at tonight, and then Nathan will take it from there. I'll note that Mr. Parrish from the township is here, and he made the comment that this started about 2 years ago, so this is a long process in the making. But the City of Victoria contracts with Laketown Township for emergency services. We're one of 4 cities that do that, so there's 4 different cities that provide emergency services to serve the needs of the township. What I would say is unique about the area that we serve is it contains approximately half of the landmass of Carver Park Reserve. Very roughly, everything north of Highway 5 and west of County 11, all the way out to Parley Lake. So there's a big chunk of land in there. Prior to 2021, we really saw a 10 to 15 calls annually for service in that contract area that we serve. In 2021, Three Rivers Park District introduced the Monarch Single Track Bike Trail, which has been a very popular attraction in the park. In 2021, that opened, and we saw that call volume jump significantly up to 24. And I think 11 of those were specifically related to the bike trail itself. So we saw a pretty significant demand on those emergency services, and that is held true moving forward. We're not at that 24 mark, but we're still, last year we finished at 19, and we're still elevated over what we would normally expect for calls for service out there. I'll just note that through the contract that exists today with the township to provide those emergency services, there's several factors that go into calculating that. It's a look at call volume in the township for the previous 5 years, the taxable market value of the land within that district. There's an administrative charge. So those all factor into what that annual fee ends up being. So I know there's just some questions about revenue and stuff like that, what impacts this will be. I won't commit to here's a number of how this may impact us, just because there's so many other variables that go into that formula. I'll just note that our 2023 contract amount with the township is $20,434 this year. So with that, I will turn it over to Nathan to.
All right, well, thank you, and good evening, Mayor and members of the council. So in front of the city this evening are a few different requests, and I'll break those down. This was all basically prompted by a petition for annexation by Three Rivers Park District in collaboration with Laketown Township. As the fire chief mentioned, really due to the costs of emergency service responses to the park area. Very notably, the city has land use control over the areas within its municipal boundaries. So as the city entertains the annexation petition, we had to do a zoning review to really understand what does this mean from our land use control perspective. And so really that's where kind of my part here started, and I'll walk through the zoning review to date. So in front of the council, there are three basic actions that we're looking for this evening if the city council is to kind of move this forward. So a zoning text amendment would be required for the creation of a new parks and open space district. A zoning map amendment would be required in order to rezone the land encompassing Carver Park Reserve. And a resolution would be required to authorize the annexation to move forward. So those are the things that would have to happen, and I'll walk through sort of the land use review here now. So up on the screen, you can see the parcels that remain in Carver Park Reserve that are not currently within the city's municipal boundary. So this is a substantial amount of land. It's like, I think it's 4 square miles, if I'm not mistaken, or thereabout. So on the screen now, you can see sort of trying to capture the entirety of the Carver Park Reserve. You'll note that some of the parcels on the right of the screen or to the east of the park area, those are already within the city boundary. They're currently zoned agriculture. And you'll also note that there are a lot of lakes within this park. And so therefore, a lot of the parkland which is in the city, and would, which would potentially be in the city, a lot of that parkland would also be in the Shoreland Overlay District. So here is an image. This is the city's future land use map. And I just wanted to touch on this briefly because I wanted to note that you'll see a dark green in various locations on this map that basically corresponds with areas that are guided for the use of park by the city's comp plan. And so in terms of rezoning this land, that would be compatible or consistent with the city's adopted vision for land in that 2040 planning horizon. So rezoning would be something that is feasible under the current guidance. So how did we arrive at the necessity to create a new parks district instead of simply some other method? Well, kind of went through a review and came up with 3 scenarios. What I have to note is that agriculture is the default zoning district. So when land from Laketown Township is brought into the city, its default zoning is agriculture. And that district has the ability or allows for land users or owners, I should say, to use their land for a park, but it requires a conditional use permit to do that. And so that seemed to be maybe a bit it could be potentially messy to have the Three Rivers Park District as a conditional use as opposed to some of the other options that we've identified. So option 2 was simply to amend the zoning code to revise the ag district and allow this use by right with various criteria. And again, that seemed maybe a bit of a messy solution. Didn't really seem like a great fit. And so we identified option 3, which is to amend the zoning code to create a new zoning district for parks and open space, which will more clearly identify uses that are allowed in the standards for those uses. This felt like the best option, the cleanest both now and then in the long term as annexations may slow down. You have a park zoning district which can be utilized to appropriately regulate parklands.
Mr. First, I have a question for you on this. If we amend our zoning code, does that change any of the zoning currently?
That is a great question. So we are currently proposing to only rezone the land that will be the Carver Park Reserve.
Okay.
So the city will have the option to, at its basically leisure, or when it makes sense, to rezone those city lands that are parkland. But we're only proposing at this time to rezone the Carver Park Reserve as a parks and open space district. The rest of the land would still remain in the agriculture district or whatever the base zoning is.
So for instance, Wasserman Lake Preserve is currently zoned agriculture, and it has a CUP to operate as a park. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, so there are a number of different situations across the city where, for example, some neighborhood parks are zoned R1. That use is allowed within the R1 district. The reason that in this case it seemed to make some sense was we have a really large park area that didn't really clearly fit into any one zoning district in terms of regulation. And so that's why the new zoning district is being proposed.
And I would trust that this land is always going to be parkland. There's no opportunity to develop any of it. So by putting it into this zoning is a
Yeah.
low risk.
Right, and so that goes back to the comp plan review. And so when we look at the future land use guidance, it's park. And so that's a pretty specific future land use guidance. It doesn't allow for a lot of other types of things to occur on that future parkland.
Perfect, thank you.
Yeah. So as stated, we looked at option 3 as really the best option for this situation in the short and long term. And so therefore are proposing to create a new zoning district. That zoning district would be created by draft ordinance 460. This is for the zoning code. And this ordinance would kind of behave like a lot of your other zoning districts. So first we looked at the zoning definitions within the city code to make sure that we're clearly defining the terms that need to be defined. Identified only 2 terms that made sense to add to the definitions and not modify any others. So those 2 terms are parks, which are private or commercial, and parks, which are public. We felt it was important to make sure that both of those terms were clearly defined. Another thing that we did was establish the purpose for this district. This was proposed by staff to the city's planning commission, and they did also find this to be suitable. Basically just saying that this district will continue to perpetuate open parks and open recreation areas and other natural areas which are desirable for water retention and as natural habitat for plant and animal life. So getting into the uses that would be allowed in this district, principal uses which are proposed to be permitted. These would be permanent open space, public and private natural conservation areas, public parks, and public golf courses. I'll talk about that really briefly, the public golf courses, as I talk about the planning commission discussion. Permitted accessory uses which are proposed are really seen as those that are really ancillary to parks and commonly seen. So these are things like public bathrooms, park shelters, playgrounds. These are low intensity park improvements that are really common. Off-street parking, which is usually associated with parklands, beekeeping, boat ramps. Importantly, mentioned hunting, but it has to be consistent with state and local laws and Three Rivers policies. I am aware that hunting is currently, I think, permitted on one of the lakes within the Carver Park Reserve, and so just allowing that to remain as the status quo. And then lastly, essential city utility structures. So should utilities need to move through this area, allowing that to happen. Lastly, there would be proposed conditional uses in this district as well that allow the city more discretion to review where more control over the land use is seen as necessary. And so this could be public buildings with a footprint larger than 2,000 square feet. That would really allow the city to look more specifically at what are those large, like for example, if there's like an administration building going in, where would that be located? What would be happening there? Those types of questions. Private parks and open space. So the city has the ability to kind of program its own parks, but may want to have a bit more control in situations where a private landowner wants to create a park. Golf courses. Again, I'll talk about golf courses in the planning commission discussion. Essential utility services, but those that are not operated by the city. And lastly, expansion of uses that are established on or before today's date that are not in conformity with district use provisions. So if that, with that one, that would be anything that would basically need a conditional use permit that would propose to be expanded in the future.
And currently, there is not Met Council water and sewer. There's in that park. Is that correct? What services
I-
are in there.
There is not. That is correct. I'm getting head nods from the city engineer. So
That is correct? Yes, or yes, there is?
there are not
There are not.
Met Council utilities in the park area, to be clear.
Thank you. I confirm. That was a backwards way of saying yes. Okay, got it.
Sorry.
All right, very good. There is not services out there currently. All right.
Okay, so that's the uses, and so just to kind of put a cap on what this draft zoning ordinance would also do, just acknowledging that the design and performance standards for parks are different than conventional zoning districts where you have more typical, like both low density residential, you're gonna have a house, and we kind of know how to regulate that. Where with parks, more flexibility is often needed, and so just acknowledging that we'll be looking at various things, and you know, including setbacks, lot coverage, building height, and just making sure that things are complementary to neighboring development and surroundings. There were a number of discussion questions. I'm not going to go through these, but we can go back to them if you would like. These are things that we talked about at the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission had a public hearing at its meeting on April 18th. We did not receive any comments from members of the public at that time at the meeting, and I haven't received anything since. There was a unanimous vote to recommend this zoning text amendment to you for approval with some changes. There were really 4 things that the Planning Commission ended up recommending. One was to modify some of the definition language. Another was to actually add public golf courses as a permitted principal use. And so just to park it here, we initially had golf courses as a just conditional use. The Planning Commission recommended adding public golf courses in the event that the city wanted to have a city-owned golf course. I'm not sure if that's a priority for the city at this time, but that is something to consider adding. Per their recommendation, it was incorporated into the ordinance. Now, having said that, functionally, a public golf course and a private golf course are pretty much the same. They have a lot of the same impacts on those that surround them, and so you may consider actually going back to what we had initially, which was just having a golf course as a conditional use. That would put both public and private courses through this public review process that would entail notifications, things of that nature to surrounding residents. Sort of like semantics. The city probably intends to be a good neighbor and would plan accordingly, but that is something for you to consider. The other 2 things that were recommended were really revisions just to kind of clear up the language and the intent of the code. Lastly, just to recap, we're looking for 4 separate approvals. I talked about 3 of them: the zoning text amendment, the zoning map amendment. A resolution is also needed to approve summary publication should the city want to move forward, and lastly, a resolution to approve the annexation. I have sample motions up on the screen here, and I'm happy to take your questions at this time. I would note that we have representatives from the Laketown Township and Three Rivers Park District. If you have any questions for them, I'm sure they'd be happy to answer them for you as well. So that's all I have for you.
Fantastic. All right. There's a lot going on here, council. So let's, I've got a few questions. Anybody else want to start the conversation? Councilmember Roberts, why don't you get started?
I mean, this seems pretty unique. I'm like, is there any, are you able to, are there any other examples of things like this being done out there?
Yeah, we actually did look for them and talked about that internally. There's a number of other cities that have similar situations. Lake Elmo is one that comes to mind. There is a similar, I would say almost similarly sized or unique park that is right in the middle of that community, and they do have a separate, a little bit more restrictive zoning situation there. There's a couple other communities that I found that had relatively similar types of codes that I looked for. Those would be Burnsville was one of them, and I think it was Bloomington was the other community that I looked at. Those communities are a bit more well established in terms of their boundaries and the kind of back and forth with some of the other parks in those areas. So one of the things that I liked from those other communities was the flexibility that they provided to the public park planning parks are different than a lot of other types of development. Often they're publicly owned, and so the community is already kind of planning for these things, and maybe there's not as much of a need for some prescriptive things like setbacks or things like that. And so it makes, in some cases, making a separate park zoning district make a lot of sense.
So understanding, because obviously we haven't had one in the past, you mentioned, right, like when we have a neighborhood park. So going forward, when we have this, would we keep doing like neighborhood parks if there was one the same way, or would you incorporate that neighborhood park into this?
Yeah, so the way that I'm thinking about this at this time is that it gives the city some options to move forward. This right now is very useful for the Carver Park Reserve example. But in the future, the city can decide, it could do separate, if there's a need for like sort of sub-park districts, you could go a P2, P1, P2 type thing. And so I wanted to think about it that way as well. And it's certainly not uncommon for communities to, especially the more, kind of well-established in terms of their boundaries and development, to have the separate park zone for all of their parks. Yeah, certainly not uncommon.
And then I guess my only other comment would just be, I guess on the golf course thing, I guess, to me, it sounds like, just based off how you described it and what I read, is that maybe we should go back to how it was, just because I don't know if we're going to be in any position to like want to do a city-owned golf course, but even if we do, we should think of, right, like we should go through the same processes we would make anyone else, right? So we should like open it up so that the public could, complain about if it's too close to their, whatever. So to me, I would move it back to what we had before the Planning Commission.
Yeah, I think I agree with that as well. It's, if we're gonna have a golf course, whether it's public or private, we want it to go through the same process that, yeah.
And to be clear, Nathan, if it would be the park district that would bring the idea to the golf course to us, correct? It would be their project, or does this become?
Certainly in some scenario there, the Three Rivers Park District could bring forth a plan for a golf course, but in talking with them, so we did want to identify like what their future plans are for the park, and my understanding is presently that there's no plans to expand or do anything else with the park, then really just reinforce what's happening now. So it didn't seem likely that a golf course would be done there, but I think the idea was that if ever the city did want to have its own public city golf course, that would be not required to have a CUP. So under the proposed ordinance to the Planning Commission, which just had golf courses, any kind of golf course would require a CUP, whether it be private or public.
Councilmember Urbanski, anything else?
Yeah, a couple more questions. So, and this is only on the heels of conversation that we just had in passing about some of the legislation that's going through the state legislature. Does the city have the potential liability of picking up any invasive species abatement should that be discovered, or is that something that will remain the responsibility of the park district?
Mr. First.
I don't know that I have a clear answer for you, so I don't want to really speculate a ton. If I had to guess, it would be the property owner would be responsible for that, but I don't know the answer to your question at this time,
Okay.
certainly.
Mr. Vos, do you have any opinion about that?
Mayor and Council, I don't know either. My sense is the same as the planner, but I don't know the answer.
I think we might want to understand some of those.
I think if we could research that topic and report back as to what liabilities we potentially could have or were indemnified from it, or if there's a possibility that we could get indemnification, that would be a desirable outcome.
Well, Mayor,
Yes,
I
Mr. Voss,
apologize.
please.
Mayor, council member, I guess just on the strictly speaking on the city's liability being changed or increased by virtue of the annexation, if that's what you're asking about, I think that's extremely unlikely. I think the extent to which invasive species of some kind might come in through the park district property, whether it's in the city or out, that's not gonna change the city's liability. And by the way, the city's liability is virtually zero, I think,
Okay.
for those things. So, I thought you were asking about the new legislation and potentials for grant money or funding or things like that. That I don't know about, but liability to the city, I would not think would be changed by the annexation or the other actions that are proposed.
Thank you.
Councilmember Urbanski, anything else?
And then just lastly, so we suspect that we're talking about in the neighborhood at current volumes of calls that will have increased costs to the city of about $25,000 that we're not experiencing today because of a revenue sharing agreement, correct?
Councilmember Vansky, mayor, members of the council. Our contract today with the township is, like I said, $20,400 for this calendar year. We as the fire department are still going to respond to those incidents.
Absolutely.
So yes, that cost burden essentially just shifts to the city's operating budget. It isn't offset by that contract revenue. And again, to say what that number is, it's really hard to put a true figure on that just because there's all those other factors that go into that, calculating that fee.
Okay, and I'm correct in understanding that you seem to correlate the increased volume of calls with the addition of the mountain bike trail that was put in this Monarch Trail. So the reserve's actions have increased the number of calls, and now the city of Victoria is going to be absorbing those costs for the taxpayers of Victoria, correct?
Correct, yes. That's where we've seen the big increase is when that bike trail opened.
Thank you.
Yes.
Councilmember Urbanski, anything else?
No, that's it. Thank you, Mayor.
All right.
My apologies for being late. I'm along the same lines of Councilmember Advansky. People are already using the park. We have no offsetting revenue, and we're going to spend another roughly $16,000 on a minimum per year on our budget. To me, I'm frustrated with that on an amenity that's already existing, that we have to absorb these taxes if we're going to do this. So unless there's something that can put us at a net zero for the next 5 years, why would we do this?
That's what we're working out here. All right. Any other questions, thoughts?
Mayor, could I add one?
Yeah,
To
please, Chief
Councilmember
Yeager.
Gunderson's comment. I'll just note, again, back to that contract, that fee is calculated looking at a 5-year history. So if there's a decrease in revenue, it's not going to be this sudden cutoff. I mean, likely it's going to decrease, but it'll slowly ramp off over that 5-year course if we anticipate that call volume going down. So it's not, our call volume gets cut in half this year, next year, the contract's instantly going to drop. We would expect it to kind of slowly taper off over.
Okay, that's helpful to know.
Yeah.
That's helpful to know. Thank you. All right. Councilmember Gunderson, anything else? Councilmember Reif, anything from you? All right, I have a couple of questions, not necessarily about the annexation. So I understand that Laketown Township has had an annexation agreement in place for a number of years, 50 or something like that. And at some point, eventually, under the orderly annexation agreement, we will come to have Three Rivers Park, Carver County Park, in our city boundaries. So it's just a matter of, this is the moment in time that the opportunity has arisen and they've asked for annexation. So my question is more around our interaction with the Three Rivers Park District. So I'm going to ask the representative from Three Rivers Park, whose name I don't know, to please come forward and introduce yourself. And what I'm trying to understand is what our relationship with you would be. So if you can introduce yourself, please.
Madam Mayor, members of the council, my name is Kelly Grisman. I'm the Director of Planning with Three Rivers Park District. I've been there, I don't even know, maybe 17 to 18 years. Not fully in that particular role, but I have worked with your staff of various shapes, sizes, forms over the last decade and a half in a planning capacity. And I think I can say that our relationship is solid, and we are generally looking to do a lot of the same things with, I see your city slogan is Parks and Lakes. That's very similar, and if you spend any time in Carver Park Reserve, and as the maps show, it is definitely the park of many lakes and water bodies.
We've worked, I think, collaboratively in recent years to try to open up the park and provide access to your residents in a less restrictive ways. 2005, we dropped our parking fee, which we saw visitation greatly increase. Previous to that, people had to pay a daily pass or pay an annual pass. We worked with the city on we have a lease on the amphitheater site, different trail connections, working collaboratively on some development not too far from here to make sure that we aren't providing a burden to the city and kind of a collaborative solution. So I would imagine that the annexation would just build off of that and that you wouldn't really maybe see or feel any differences.
Yeah, so Three Rivers Park is kind of their own government, their own quasi-government, so you have your own safety services out there. You have, you don't need our city sewer and water at this point in time. I think what I'm trying to understand is just kind of, even though we're annexed in, and now we are going to be responsible as opposed to Laketown Township, other than that, our relationship probably doesn't change, only for the better, through partnership.
I believe that is correct, yep.
All right, so, so really, the change for us is great bragging rights that we have a Three Rivers Park District in the city of Victoria. And we will be, over the course of the next several years, probably trying to absorb some of these excess calls. Do you have, with any of your other parks, an agreement with any other community about excessive calls or any of that kind of thing?
Madam Mayor, fellow members of the council, we do not. This feels like a very unique situation. We have mountain bike courses in 3 of our other parks, and we have not been asked by any other council to do a cost participation or a different type of MOU or partnership to kind of address that. It seems like it's all worked itself out over time.
Okay, thank you.
I just have
Yeah.
another question.
Councilmember Ivansky, please.
The roadways that exist within the reserve, are they going to remain private roads that are part of the park district, or would that be brought into the city as city roads where we would potentially have road construction costs and plowing and other maintenance items?
Yep. Mayor, fellow members of the council. The only road I believe in question in the annexation is County Road 11, and I would defer to your planner if I'm wrong. The other roads in the park are all privately owned and maintained by Three Rivers Park District. So like the Grimm Farm Road, the Lake Auburn Boat Launch area, I believe that those are all Three Rivers roads, like more of a driveway, although they function kind of as a road to access those different park amenities.
Okay, thank you.
Council, as long as we've got Ms. Grisman here at the podium, any questions for her? All right, thank you. Council, anything further? Any other questions, thoughts?
I think in terms of thoughts, I think, Councilmember Gunderson points out appropriately that the city of Victoria is going to effectively have a tax increase with the annexation. The city residents will now have a revenue or cost burden that shifts from the township to the city. On the surface, I think that feels like something that, in transparency terms, we're talking about and letting the citizens know that if we move forward with this, that is going to happen. That said, I think that there's a pretty fair number of, let's say, we'll call them customers of the park system, that are coming from a very wide array of the Twin Cities area that use these parks, that are going to travel through Victoria roads, see Victoria businesses, hopefully stop in Victoria and contribute to adding goods and services in other ways. In some respects, that's been happening. We've been enjoying that. And the residents of Laketown Township have sort of been, one could construe that they've been subsidizing that. So in some sense, you could view this as a good neighbor thing where we're starting to pick up the cost of things that we probably more inured the benefits of. So on that balancing of the equation, I can see that offset doesn't strike me as something that is too much of a pill to swallow at this point.
Thank you. Council, any other comments?
What was a $20,000 increase in our budget percentage-wise when we were going through looking at cutting things last year? Every $5,000 was what percent?
Councilmember Gunderson, Mayor, members of the council, if you give me 2 minutes to look that up for you, so I give you accurate information, I can get that information to you.
Thank you. While she's looking, any other thoughts? Hi, yeah, please, Ms. Grisman, please come back.
Thank you, Mayor. I know it's uncustomary to invite myself back up. I wanted to just ask a clarifying question on the number because I do think it's really important and that the city should enter into this agreement eyes wide open. I believe the 24,600 is for the entire Lake Township area, not just the incidents within Carver Park Reserve. And I believe I heard you say that there was about 25% of those calls within or like an increase of 25? So I just want to make sure that when we're throwing out 20,000 or 25,
that includes
like the
all of
part-
Lake Town
like a
Township, not
general-
just, not just
you.
Three Rivers. Yes, you are correct.
Mayor, members of the council.
Yes, Chief Hager, please.
The $20,400 contract amount is for the entirety of the Lake Town Township
Yes.
district that we serve, which includes the Three Rivers Park District, so many other neighborhoods. Just referencing the 2021 call data, about half of our calls for service in that contract area were in the park itself.
Okay,
And that's why I asked every 5,000.
all right. Ms. Hardy, please.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. So for this budget year, each 0.1% was $6,000.
0.1%.
So 1% would be $60,000.
Okay, very good. Okay, very good. Council, any other questions or comments? All right, seeing none, we're looking for 4 motions this evening. So, and they're 4 separate motions, they're shown on our screen. So with that, council, I will take a motion.
I'll make a motion to adopt ordinance 460ZC, amending zoning code section 25 to create a zoning district establishing standards for parks and open space.
All right, we have a motion.
Oh,
Sorry, Mayor, members of
Yes,
the council, just to
Mr.
clarify the
First.
motion, you were discussing the merits of just including golf courses as a conditional use or separating public golf courses from private. I just wanted to make sure that your motion captured whatever you landed on.
All right, so we will have a friendly amendment to that motion to include all golf courses, public and private, with council's agreement. Looks like consensus here. All right, we have a motion on the floor. Can we get a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. I will entertain a second motion, please.
I can do them all, I guess. A motion to adopt ordinance 461ZC, amending the official zoning map for the city of Victoria to rezone the land encompassing the Carver Park Reserve as parks and open space, P1.
We have a motion. Can I get a second?
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. We'll have a third motion, please.
Motion to adopt resolution authorizing summary publication of ordinance 460ZC and ordinance 461ZC.
We have a motion. Can I get a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries.
Finally, a motion to adopt resolution approving the annexation of property comprising Carver Park Reserve in Lake Town Township.
We have a motion. Can I get a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Hey,
Motion carries. Does the clerk have the dissension noted? Yes. Councilmember Gunderson. Thank you. Thank you. We're moving on to our next item, which is item 6.3, our first quarter update on our strategic plan. And presenting that this evening is Assistant City Manager Alyssa Swanson. Ms. Swanson. Welcome as we move our name plaques around and we shuffle around our seats. Thank you.
I think we're up in action. So, good evening, Mayor, members of City Council. I'm sure this slide looks very familiar to you. This is about our 9th quarterly update for the 2021, 2022, and 2023 strategic plan. So in the past 2 years, this is actually start of year 3 for this strategic plan, but for the last 2 years, there's been much progress made within this plan. In total, there are 123 initiatives, and as of today, there have been 84 completed and or ongoing. Now, in the staff report, there is a spreadsheet document that documents the exact status of each one of these 123 initiatives. And each one of these initiatives, I do have to say, link up to the 8 priorities you see on the screen, which are identified in that plan. But to save us some time, instead of going through each one of those 123 initiatives, staff, we took a moment to spotlight 3 of them to give you a brief update on some progress that has been made specifically within this quarter on some of those initiatives. Now, if you do have any question on any one of those that we haven't talked about this evening, please let me know. I'm happy to answer any questions or work with other members of staff to help find those answers. So with that, I will get started. So the first spotlight is related to infrastructure and transportation with the initiative of connect 50% of lift stations to fiber over the 3 years of the strategic plan. Now, with your approval, council staff was able to utilize ARPA dollars to connect key areas of our water infrastructure to our water treatment plant using fiber technology. There's areas that we've had dark fiber in our city, but we haven't had the resources to light it up, so they actually were connected. So utilizing ARPA dollars, we were able to do that this last quarter. This really does help bolster our communication between these 2 different sites or these multiple sites. I like to use the example of at home, we have great internet. Whatever the wires are in the ground, they're pretty great. They allow us to connect, allow us to use Wi-Fi on our phones. But if you install fiber, that connection gets so much greater. And that's exactly what this does for our water infrastructures. So having this in the ground, having this lit up, allows us to enhance our ability to monitor our water pressure, our water usage, and any other key pieces of data more effectively and in real time. And then it also allows us to respond to emergencies or issues that might come up as we get alerts just a little bit faster. So this is a great priority. Now I will say on the screen and in the strategic plan, it does say 50% of lift stations were not there yet. But this is a great starting point for us. Now we understand what is needed to light our infrastructure up. So once we do get more dark fiber in the ground, we're able to light these up quicker and faster, and we know what exactly the equipment is needed for those. So the second spotlight is under service excellence, and the initiative is to pursue grant opportunities when possible. And the one I want to specifically talk about that we were awarded in Q1 was a $15,000 grant from Carver County Environmental Services. This grant allows the city to host our annual composting site, which we allow the residents to bring any yard compost 3 seasons out of the year, spring, summer, and fall. They can bring their yard waste to our former public works site, sticks, leaves, branches, whatever have you. And then that compost, the company we have used in the past, then transfers that into soil. So it again gets repurposed through another way. So this is a great grant opportunity for us to reduce the cost of service on a program that really does provide for our residents. And then the other piece to this and why there are bikes being shown on the screen is that this grant also allowed us to create a new event this year, which is a Bike Fix It program. We partnered with Carver County and a nonprofit in the city of Chanhassen, Project Lifecycle, and the Better Society is what it's called, to allow residents to come in for free to get minor repairs on their bikes. This event was held this weekend, May 6th, and we don't have the final counts, but we know there was at least more than 40 bikes in attendance for that event. Yeah, so it was great.
I will say we used it. They were great. Everyone was great, and it was very busy down there. So it was a great thing for the city.
Yes, great, awesome. And then for the last spotlight is under engagement and communication. The initiative is to explore and implement new channels to reach new audiences. In this quarter, we launched a new digital newsletter, which will be done bi-monthly or twice a month, right after our council meetings. And the reason we have it right after our council meetings is we're able to also broadcast our council briefs through that. But in addition, it will talk about any news that's coming up, any events that are happening, any public meetings that are planning on to occur, and then any specific updates or educational programs we want to throw out there. So it's just another way we can reach residents through a digital means. And with that, Mayor and Council, short quarterly update, but I hope it was informative, and I will stand for any questions you may have.
Thank you, and thank you to the staff who is working hard. This is their roadmap for the work that they do every day, so we appreciate that a lot. Councilmember Reif, please.
Yeah, just one comment. Point number 2 on the compost, great feedback from the residents, including myself and our family and the neighbors. So it's just 3 seasons a year is excellent, and I don't know, I don't know if a lot of cities do this, but this is great.
Yeah.
So.
All right. Council, any other questions or comments? We don't need, we do need a motion to adopt. Oh, we don't.
No, this, Mayor, members of the council, this is an informational only.
All right, terrific. Well, thank you again, Alyssa. Then moving on, we're at item 6.4, which is a work plan for our Senior Advisory Committee. And again, Ms. Swanson is with us.
Hello again, Mayor, members of council. I'm going to pull up the Senior Advisory proposed 2023 work plan on the screen, so we're all looking at the same document. So the Senior Advisory Committee has been active since 2021, when we have a really engaged citizens committee there. They're really wanting to help give back to their community and really align themselves with the strategic plan. So hence the reason on this work plan, we do put the related strategic priorities on there as well as timelines to make sure that we're getting things done. And the reason I say that is we have 7 initiatives here. They're all very hefty, and we have a small committee of 4 right now. So before I dive into the work plan, I do have to make a plug. We have 3 vacancies within the Senior Advisory Committee. We have applications open. It can be found downstairs at our Recreation Center and, of course, on our website. So if anyone here, or anyone from the public knows anyone that might be a really good fit, or you yourself is interested in being in the committee, we'd be happy to have you. So. With that, we're just going to go through each one of these items, and Mayor, members of council, if you do have any questions or concerns on any of them, feel free to interrupt me, and we can go through them. So with that, the first one is fairly routine for this committee, which is to conduct an assessment on the senior resource packet. The packet was created in 2021. It was one of the first big initiatives for the committee. And they heard from their residents, their neighbors, their friends, that there's really no one-stop shop for senior resources in the regional communities. So they took that initiative on and created a wonderful resource packet for anyone, but it is geared towards seniors on programs and web pages and pretty much anything that could go into making your life a little bit easier or help that can provide you into one packet itself, and it is available in print as well as digitally on a web page. So annually, we review that. We ensure that the web links still work, the phone numbers can still be reached, that the resources are still there, and then they have a chance to add to the resource packet annually as well. So it's just a good double check for us. The second one is to review and recommend options for the Senior Resource Expo. Last year in 2022, the committee held its first Senior Resource Expo. It was a great experiment. In a way to try and reach residents again. They did the senior resource packet, then they were trying to identify new ways that they could to reach members of the community. We had 60 people in attendance for that, which is a good amount of people. However, the committee heard from others, especially the caregiver community, that Expo at that time does not always fit their schedule. So what can they do to provide these individual resources listed in our packet to the greater community of Victoria? So that will be part of their exercise according to this work plan if approved. It's just identifying what can they do differently to reach those that might have been missed in the expo. The third is recommend ways to better communicate and reach Victoria's population. This is number one for them. So each meeting we go through different events, or we hear from different organizations, different departments within the city, and they provide feedback on ways that we can better reach them. So we had Dawn Plummer from Carver County Public Health. She meets with us every month. She provides feedback on what's going on at a county level, and then the Citizens Committee just lets her know ways that she can better reach her groups. The next is become a community stakeholder in the Downtown West planning discussions. This is new for them this year, and they've already started on this. So when it comes to any sort of recommendations, or if they need a focus group, this committee will now be part of those discussions to provide feedback on what's going on downtown West, especially those green spaces or those open spaces. Going on to page 2, develop walking and trail routes for the city and incorporate them into the trail map. So what this would entail is they would start looking at the city's 32 miles of trails and sidewalks, the current network, and start mapping out what makes sense, how do we connect people utilizing this great trail network that we already have, and create and identify specific routes that might be, that make sense. How do we connect people from downtown to Cornerstone Village or Steiger Lake Condos to the Arboretum? And then obviously you can do that on paper, but then the next step for them would be to walk that. Look at how does the elevation change? What does the incline look like? Do we have enough benches on those areas? Just to really look at how do we make our community best for all. And then obviously I already mentioned the Carver County Office of Aging, but we'll continue to engage with them and hear what initiatives Carver County is doing at their level. And then lastly, and this is something new this year as well, would be to explore what a senior facility could like in Victoria. The first part for that would just be to identify what would be a senior facility, what does that look like, and then review potential locations for maybe a short-term senior facility. What spaces do we already have in our community that might fit the needs of whatever that senior facility could potentially be? So if the committee identifies maybe we're just looking for gathering space, do we have that at City Hall? Do we have that at the Recreation Center? Do we have another organization that's in our city that could provide that space? What does that look like? So with that, Mayor, members of City Council, that is the proposed 2023 work plan, and I will stand for any questions.
Awesome, thank you. Great work from you and the advisory committee. This looks like a hefty plan with lots of good stuff in it. So, and an important population for us in the city of Victoria. So happy to have them engaged. And just to reiterate, there are 3 vacancies on this council, so join in. All right, council, questions, comments? All right, seeing none, I will take a motion to adopt the work plan.
I'll make a motion to adopt the work plan for the.
We have a motion. Can I get a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you so much, Ms. Swanson. Now we're moving on to 6.5, which is to adopt a resolution accepting bids and awarding a contract for well number 6 pump house. Fascinating infrastructure stuff. So thank you, Ms. Guerin. You're gonna lay this out for us. The floor is yours.
Just get to the right one. All right. Great. Good evening, Mayor, members of the City Council. I am going to keep this brief tonight. What you're being asked to consider tonight is adoption of a resolution accepting bids and awarding a contract for the pump house for well number 6. A little bit of history on this well. We've been at this for a very long time, actually. Prior to 2021, the city undertook a well siting study to determine the best location for our future wells that we need in our south growth area. So that actually ultimately will include wells 6, 7, 8, 9 that we'll need to be planning for in our south growth area, as well as water treatment plant 2. So that's a presentation for a different day. But in October of 2021, the City Council authorized design for well number 6 that was planned to be located in an outlot obtained from the developer for the Marsh Hollow project. So we did not have to go out and purchase land for well number 6. Rather, we were able to locate it within an outlot in the development, which is a good cost savings. A number of months later, the design was complete specifically for a test well and then construction of the production well itself. So we have to build a test well that's at a lower cost before we move on to drill the production well essentially adjacent to where we drilled the test well. So that contract was awarded in April of 2022, and here we are a year later, and construction of the well itself is substantially complete. So if you were to go out to the Marsh Hollow development and look to the south of the lift station, all you would see is a casing sticking out of the ground, but that is our future well. So we can't have a well without a pump and a pump house and chemical feed. So we completed the design of the pump house that will surround the well. That will include the pump and the ability to add required chemicals into the water before it's dispersed to the city system. So we opened bids for the pump house on May 4th, 2023, which was just last week. So here we are tonight, asking the council to accept the bids and award a contract for that construction. The substantial completion date for the pump house is June 1st, 2024. So these projects have a long lead time, particularly today due to the control system is the supply chain issue that's holding up the time frame for the well to be completed. And then I did just want to note with this last little highlight here that well number 6 is needed to provide water supply for new homes that are already under construction. But as has been mentioned to the council in the past, staff will be recommending that we hold off on approving any new final plats in our South Growth area beyond what's already been preliminary platted and concept platted or concept reviewed until the well is complete. So that is that bullet. We did receive 4 bids for the project, and American Liberty Construction was the low bidder with an amount of $1.459 million. Stantec, the design engineer for the project, has experience with American Liberty Construction and did recommend award of a contract to them. The project budget for well number 6, we're looking at about $2.1 million all in for all of the work that's occurred to date and the engineering to get it through to completion. We will be bonding for some or all of the construction of the pump house. So the finance director will be bringing that back at a future date with our bond package for the year. And with that, I would happily answer any questions you might have.
Thank you. Well number 6, how big can Victoria get with well number 6?
Oh, that's a trick question that I haven't looked up lately. But the good news is we were concerned through the well siting study that we did, we were concerned that we were going to be looking at wells that produce a smaller amount of water than is efficient. But with the test work and the production well construction, we are able to get about 1,000 to 1,200 GPM out of this well, which would be equivalent to what we have in, nobody else is here. Tell me if I want to say well 5 or well 4, but 2 of our big wells that serve the treatment plant. Okay. So our existing population, we have well 2, 3, 4, and 5. We only have to run them all at once when we decide to continually nonstop water our lawns in 90-degree heat. So.
Okay, that's good news, because I remember that as we were doing some test drilling there, we were very concerned that that was not going to be adequate, but it did not turn out to be true. So the good news are there. All right. Council, questions for Ms. Guerin?
Just one quick, it says
Councilmember
is this pump house similar to the one that we have over by Holy Family High School?
Generally, yes, except that The pump house that's over by Holy Family was constructed before we had a water treatment plant, so we actually don't add chemicals or any of those things at the location of that pump house anymore, because that well pumps directly to our water treatment plant and gets all the treatment and chemicals. This new well, this is a thing that's probably worth noting, eventually will need to be connected to wherever we end up putting water treatment plant number 2.
Thank you.
All right. Council, any other questions? All right, with that, I will entertain a motion.
Motion to adopt resolution accepting bids and awarding contract for well number 6 pump house.
We have a motion. Can I get a second?
Second?
We have a motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Our next item is item 6.6, the Hunter's Glen preliminary plat. And the last two gentlemen in the audience who have waited so patiently through all the rest of the meeting. So we got two presenters on this evening, starting with Nathan First and followed by City Engineer Kara Guerin. Again, Mr. First, you are up first.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the council. Yeah, so we will want to co-present this. Both the city engineer and myself have done a substantial amount of review on the application, so we both have a lot of insights to share with you on the review. What we are looking at this evening is a preliminary plat, preliminary PUD, and a shoreland variance request for the Hunter's Glen development. The developer is Summergate Developments. They are here this evening in our audience with their engineer as well. So where are we at in this subdivision process? The preliminary plat is the kind of second of 3 steps. We're really working through a lot of the details of the development and granting those major entitlements. The planned unit development process, as the city council well knows, is intended to provide for flexibility in situations where development is innovative, creative, and needs some flexibility to protect sensitive environmental, cultural, or other economic features. So at this point in the process, again, the preliminary PUD would be approved concurrently with the preliminary plat. And I'm going to, with this one, just kind of park it here and hand it back over to Kara to kind of talk through the context of this particular development. There is a lot of history in this area of the city, and Kara knows that history really well. So, Kara.
Excellent. Ms. Guerin, please take it away.
Thank you, and I'm going to ask you to hit presentation mode so they can see your slide.
I didn't do that, did I?
I know, whatever this picture is we're looking at is lovely.
You should see it on the screen now.
Alrighty, so Mayor, members of the council, for the benefit of the public, and maybe they're all watching from home, but we thought it might be beneficial to take a little bit higher level step back related to this development to provide some neighborhood context to why staff is recommending what staff was recommending, pertaining particularly to roadway connection and some of the considerations that the council is being asked to consider for this project. So we'll stroll down memory lane. This is an aerial of the area from 2002. So back before Lennar first started constructing the Laketown development, prior to that period of time, the city and the property owners and developers in the area, both in this south area north of Marsh Lake Road and south of Lake Wasserman, and then also in the area where like the Ambergate development is and the Rhapsody development, a whole group of folks got together and funded an environmental process. So it's called an AUAR. I won't spend a bunch of time explaining that, but that process took a look at what development would mean in this area from a transportation perspective, impact to infrastructure, impact to natural resources. It's a big giant, back in the day when we printed things, report with a whole lot of information pertaining to those areas. And it really was back first through that period of time that we started to make a determination that we needed a north-south collector. I call it a north-south collector. It doesn't go due north because the city of Victoria has lakes everywhere, but that we would need a north-south collector to serve the residents in this area's development came through. And when I say collector, what I'm referring to is a city street that has restrictions on it for access. So what we do when we have a collector road, Lakes Parkway would be another example of a collector road that we constructed with development. We restrict driveway access on that roadway, and we increase the width a little bit to really carry more traffic and to improve safety. So by not having residential driveways backing on to roads that we anticipate more traffic, they can be safer, as well as help to cut down on our complaints about cars speeding past people's houses when they're out playing with their kids on the sidewalk adjacent to the street. So if you want to hop to the next slide. This one is from 2011. So this is Red Fox coming into the neighborhood around the elementary school. So from 2000, it was about 2004 was the first Lennar plat. And Lennar owned at this time really all of the land that's been developed today in the area. They had purchased a vast majority of it ahead of time. So through that process, the developer provided land for the elementary school and for parkland, and then also began construction of Red Fox Drive. From 2011 to this aerial, this brings us to where we are today, where the Lennar land is fully built out at this point. So they have pretty much developed everything. They have developed everything that they originally acquired ownership of back in the early 2000s. Pop ahead. So this next slide is just a different perspective of the same lot lines and roadway alignments, but what we did turn on here was just some of the natural features. So this is 6 Mile Creek running through the site, and then additionally just the wetlands that have been protected through the development process in the area. In the city of Victoria, wetlands are placed on outlots that are deeded to the city. That isn't common in all cities. It's an extra level of protection that we do because we find that it's easier to minimize encroachment into the wetland areas when it's not private property. So we do still deal with some challenges of encroachment into wetlands that the planning code enforcement staff has the pleasure of dealing with, but it's a much clearer boundary. So this next slide is just showing roadway connections and trail connections. Trails are shown in red, blue are sidewalks, but Red Fox Drive here is the collector road that's been constructed to date since that first Greenfield photo. And we are now here looking at the Kelzer property and looking to have that collector extended to Marsh Lake Road. I also just want to highlight here that Marsh Lake Road is designated in our comprehensive plan as a future county road, so is anticipated to have significant traffic increases over time as development occurs to the west. On the east end of Marsh Lake Road and County Road 11, the county has obtained funding for a roundabout for that location, and we anticipate design work starting for that roundabout soon, actually. I might end up coming back to here later, but we can move on for now. So, you know, with the development all getting finished off north of Marsh Lake Road, we did adopt a comp plan update in 2019, which we do every 10 years, that began to start looking at the roadway network for the south growth area south of Marsh Lake Road. And I did just want to highlight here that that north-south collector that we envisioned back in 2002 that's been constructed will continue on through the south growth area and tie into County Road 10. We would envision this collector, its exact alignment will be a challenge. You can see this green space is representing wetlands and other natural amenities that we have to work our way through in constructing this collector, but this will certainly provide access to any residents who move into this area to the elementary school located up in the Laketown development. Any questions just on that broader transportation history? It might make sense to pause and ask before I keep talking, but you can certainly come back to that.
What will really change about, so like, right, you mentioned, Marsh Lake Road potentially becoming a county road at some point. One, I believe you've said in the past that that's not really, like, it's probably a ways out still, right? Like, it's not something that they've wanted to do right away, I think you've said, so correct me if I'm wrong. But two, what will, like, when it does eventually, like, what changes would we see? If, other than just, it's now a county road.
Well, we had the pleasure of spending 2 years working with Carver County on a vision for Marsh Lake Road. So originally, the city council was asking the county to come in and construct future county road, Marsh Lake Road, prior to this development occurring, and we got into the public engagement process and really couldn't reach a point of agreement between the city and the county and the residents who lived along the corridor for what would be built there. So the council decided to defer the county road until some future date. So, you know, realistically, the demand for that road to be improved, and it will need to be improved. So when we did the project back in 2018, 19, COVID time warp, we simply paved the footprint that was there. We did do improvements to the base to make it a 9-ton road, but we didn't expand it for increasing capacity. When we start developing into the western growth area, eventually our road system will tie into Waconia's road system, and then you'll really start to see a demand for a higher capacity on this road. And the reason why I say that I'm not anticipating that tomorrow is the city hasn't had a lot of landowners in the western growth area approaching the city that they're interested in selling their land for development. Typically, when that starts happening, we'll start getting questions about how will you get sewer to this neighborhood? How will you get water? What will the roads look like? We get occasional questions, but as our understanding from the folks out there, none of them are in a hurry to sell their farms for development. Now, certainly that could change. You know, it's their landowner right to pursue annexation under the annexation agreement and sell their land for development. But 10, 20, 30.
Yeah, Councilmember Reif, please.
Yeah, just a quick definition, I know you gave it earlier, but of a collector road. A little more width to that. What about the driveways again? Driveways just not directly on that road?
Correct. So we restrict driveways, we construct it wider. We build all of our roads to a 9-ton standard, so that wouldn't vary. We do require pedestrian facilities on one or both sides of the road, depending on what its function is. Typically, you'll see a trail on one or both sides, and then we'll look to create safe crossings along that corridor for people to get across it.
Okay, thank you.
Certainly. So then just shifting gears a little bit, we thought it would be a good idea to just highlight for the public how all of these different entities that we were talking about at the Planning Commission meeting last time fit in, and I think I'm supposed to stop talking.
Thank you.
And back to Mr. First. All right.
So you know, during the last item that I presented this evening, which was the annexation item, we talked about the city having land use control over areas within its municipal boundary. There are other regulatory agencies that have basically jurisdiction over areas in the city, but that looks like different things, or it kind of happens in different ways. And so we kind of wanted to work through what that looks like and how these different agencies kind of impact the review process for development. So the Met Council, as we talked about with the comprehensive plan, requires communities in the metro area to adopt a comp plan every 10 years. And so that was done by the city last in 2019. That comp plan really sets the standard for development, and it really provides charts a path for how the city will eventually develop and therefore serve developments with things like roads and sewers. And one of the things that the city has found in the last several years is that the Met Council is unwilling to issue any permits for sanitary sewer services that would connect to their wastewater system. Development in the city of Victoria does connect to the Met Council's regional water system, and those developments which don't meet the density obligations under the city's comp plan cannot receive a sewer permit to do that. So that is a huge barrier for developments and a very important approval for them. And so that is a permit issued by the Met Council that the city doesn't really have any influence over. The DNR is a little bit different. In areas that are within the city's shoreland overlay district, the DNR does have the authority to review and comment on developments and various land use applications that happen in those areas. The DNR does not have the authority to determine approval or denial, but they do have the authority. The city is obligated to provide them with what the application is, the materials, all of those things, and they have the ability to comment and provide comments to the city for consideration during its review and ultimate approval or denial or whatever the action is. And then there are other agencies that I believe the city engineer would be in a better position to kind of comment on their impact. And so I'll hand it back over to the city engineer.
Great. So the next bullet here relates to the Minnehaha Creek Watershed District, or Carver County WMO. Any land within the city of Victoria and in our growth area falls under the jurisdiction of one or the other of those two entities. So you wouldn't be in both Minnehaha Creek Watershed District and the Carver County Water Management Organization. Your land would be located in one or the other. But regardless, they have regulatory authority over wetlands. So in the case of the city of Victoria, we are not the regulating body for wetland impacts. We've I don't want to say deferred, but that responsibility lies with these water agencies. The city would have the ability to take over that authority if that was something we were interested in doing, but that's not something the city has pursued. From my perspective, we've appreciated having this outside entity whose sole purpose is looking at water resources so that they can bring to the review a lens that's really focused on the natural features only without needing to have that, trying to balance the perspective of land use or property owner rights. They really are reviewing what the proposed wetland impacts are. So they help with the wetland determination. They're part of a panel of folks that meet with the wetland scientist who determines what the wetland boundaries are and has to make a determination that, yes, this is a wetland and what type of wetland it is. But they also administer the process for impacting the wetlands. So wetland impacts are allowed by state statute. There's a process you have to go through to impact them and to mitigate for them. So they do that on our behalf. They also regulate stormwater management. So they have a whole slew of rules around how rate control, so flood protection and water quality protection for downstream bodies, they regulate for that as well. So any project in the city would be required to get a permit through that entity. So different than the DNR where they're reviewing and commenting, MCWD and Carver County WMO issue permits on projects. And if they don't issue a permit, a project can't move forward. That's very similar with some of these other permitting agencies that are noted here, depending on the particular circumstance. As an example, if we had a development that required connection of a new road to a county road, the county issues permits for that. So they have specific things that they're regulating and issuing permits for. Miss anything?
I think so. So I'm going to jump back in, Mayor.
Yes, please, Mr.
So we're going to split this slide as well. Apologies for the back and forth,
No
but it just
worries.
makes the most sense. And so, talking about the regulatory framework, the city obviously has a very large role to play in development review, really starting with the comprehensive plan. As mentioned, really, this is a very important guiding document, and really primarily development has to be consistent with that comp plan in order for orderly and smart growth to occur. So with that said, when the city is reviewing preliminary plats, really, again, it's primarily looking at the city's comprehensive plan. Does the roadway configuration alignment meet our planned roadway, designations and alignments? Does the density of the development meet the required density of this future land use area? Are we providing for open space where we're saying, or natural resource protections where we're saying we're going to do that? And then final plat approval, as you well know, with some of the more recent ones, we're really looking for consistency with that preliminary plat approval. Once we've determined it's consistent with the comp plan, making sure those final, more dialed in plans are consistent with the preliminary plat. And then on construction plans, I'm going to turn it back over to Kara.
So as the project is moving through the city's process, typically a development will be currently moving through these other permitting agencies' processes. So as an example, Minnehaha Creek typically will be doing concurrent review when we're doing preliminary plat, but typically they aren't going to issue a permit until after the city has issued preliminary plat approval, because they don't want to infringe on the city's land use authority. So they want to make sure that their approvals are following yours. But certainly then in turn, we want to make sure that applicants have approval from these other regulatory agencies before they're given the go-ahead. So while this final step doesn't typically happen at the forefront of the council, when we get to final approval of final detailed construction plans, then my job and the other staff at the city is to look for those plans to be consistent with the prior approvals, certainly consistent with city standards for infrastructure, but then also not conformation, but confirmation that other regulatory agencies' permits have been issued or pending. So we won't release everything to move to construction until we know that they have, as an example, the Minnehaha Creek Watershed District permit in hand before we give them the, okay, off you go to construction.
And back to me again. So I think, part of the reason that we wanted to kind of go through some of those things was really to talk about this project in particular. And so the existing conditions of this property are sort of challenging, you could say. It's, this specific project is seeking to balance a lot of obligations. You have shoreline protections, which are, a requirement of state statute by DNR rules. You also have the density obligation the city has, which is another state statute that is requiring conformance with Met Council plans and policies. So, that all being said, there are some challenges to the development of this particular property, and that is why you're seeing some of the requests come in for this particular project, the planned unit development and the shoreline variance. And I'll talk about the shoreline variance in a bit more detail. So the current use of this property in the historic agricultural land use, I believe going back to, I think, 1950, is agriculture. So this property has been used in that fashion for some time. There is the presence of some wetlands on site. Those are wetlands which have been, I think, tilled as a part of that agricultural use. And lastly, there are some trees on the property. We do have a tree inventory, which indicates presence of some trees and definitely some removals required with mitigation provided. So dating back on this particular request, there have been some sketch plat reviews that have taken place. First, starting in November of last year, the Planning Commission was able to review the sketch plat and provided pretty detailed feedback on two specific things specifically. Those things were side yard setbacks and roadway alignment. The developer took those comments, revised their sketch, brought it back, having addressed those to the Planning Commission in January of 2023, and then that was brought to you all in January of this year. So the preliminary plat for Hunter's Glen is up on the screen now. And so just to kind of narrate through it, this is very consistent with the sketch plat that was brought to you in January. There are 22 single-family residential units. This development is at about 12, just over that, gross acres of land. When we net out the wetlands that are present on this property, you're looking at about 8.69 net acres, and so that would result in approximately 2.53 units per acre, and this would be consistent as proposed with the city's density goals and range. I just want to walk through a couple more things here, and we'll talk about a lot of the features and details of this development, but there are proposed 2 outlots, which would be on either side of that connection of Red Fox Drive. So as Kara noted, there is proposed in this development a connection from the current terminus northeast of this development. So that current terminus of Red Fox Drive would be then actually, Red Fox Drive will be connected down through Marsh Lake Road. Timber Terrace on the north side of this development will also be looped into connecting with Red Fox Drive. And lastly, Catkin Way will be connected east to west. Catkin Way will connect to the western boundary of this proposed development, and that will facilitate future development of those neighboring parcels to the west. If and when that development does occur, it will have access. That access would be a challenge given the county's access spacing requirements along Marsh Lake Road, making this the best way to connect this, those properties should they develop to the city's transportation network. So the lot regulations that are proposed are up on the screen now. They are highlighted for you. As said, there's 22 single-family lots proposed with a minimum lot area proposed of just over 8,500. The developer notes that the average size of the lots, the average minimum lot area, you could say, is over 10,000 square feet. So certainly not all of those lots will be down at that 8,500 square foot. The minimum lot width proposed here in this development is 66 feet wide. There would be 8-foot wide setbacks, so 16 feet of setback on either side, leaving about 50 feet for the building pad. The minimum lot depth proposed is 125 feet. The front yard setback proposed 25 feet. And lastly, impervious surface is requesting, they are requesting a variance to the impervious surface standard to allow for a maximum on all lots of 4,500 square feet as opposed to a specific percentage. And just to kind of get in the weeds a little bit on that, it's typically recommended or has been recommended by staff that if the city is going to approve a variation from the impervious surface, that it's done with a overall square feet as opposed to a percent. That makes the application of that standard very, kind of much easier as the city then receives building permits that get reviewed, and it's more uniform that way. So as it relates to the surrounding development, you can see that some of these standards are kind of exceeding the surrounding development, being Laketown 16th and 17th. Some of the standards are below. It sort of depends on which edition of Laketown that you look at. Generally speaking, this development is conforming or consistent rather with those surrounding Laketown developments. So I want to talk a little bit more about the shoreland overlay. So again, the city is required by state statute to have a shoreland overlay district that's consistent with DNR rules. The impacts that has on this development, there are a few. Number one, the PUD and plating process is required to, the city is required to share the application with the DNR. The DNR is allowed to comment. To date, we haven't received any specific comments on the request. We did forward this to the DNR, and they asked a series of follow-up questions, and we kind of worked out how they would propose that the city ultimately entitle this development, but there were no specific comments as it relates to the request on whether the DNR was advising conditions of approval or denial.
So at what point would that happen?
Typically, that would happen. So we are required by the city code to provide the DNR at least 10 days prior to a city meeting. So that would be before the planning commission meeting. So we have been in the practice of giving them much more time than 10 days to review it. And in this case, had a number of back and forth. So they're well aware of the application. It is not uncommon for the DNR to receive something and not provide any comments.
Is that like acceptance then? Or,
I mean,
that
that's typically when we don't receive comments, we assume that there's no real concern with what's being proposed.
they don't say there's no concern, they just don't say anything?
That's my experience with the DNR and in this community and other communities as well.
Mayor, if I could just add.
Please.
Yeah, so the DNR in this variance process from shoreline ordinances, they don't literally have like veto power or denial power. Even where they strongly are resistant to something, they can make that comment, and all that requires, I shouldn't say all that requires then a city that wouldn't agree with that and wants to grant the variance. City has heightened obligations to explain its rationale for granting the variance, and obviously there's the ability to challenge that then, but there isn't, the DNR does not ultimately have veto power here. So that's part of the reason why, practically speaking, they don't feel obligated to give approvals. They are not in the approval denial position here.
All right, understood. All right, thank you. Carry on, Mr. First.
Thank you. So the developer is requesting a variance to shoreland standards, and those are impervious surface and open space. Before I talk about those, I just want to mention why they're requesting a shoreland variance as opposed to simply working through a planned unit development process, which historically has been kind of how it's been done. The DNR doesn't really accept planned unit developments as a way to deviate from the shoreland rules, because that is effectively a rezoning. And without getting too far in the weeds, they prefer that cities stick to state statute, which for flexibility would necessitate a variance. And so that is why we are looking at a variance in the shoreland, as opposed to working this through the planned unit development process, which allows the city to grant flexibility from its own standards. So hopefully that wasn't too far in the weeds, but effectively in working with the DNR, it was established that this is the best path forward for the entitlements on this project specifically.
Is everybody good with this? Moving forward?
So there was
This is-
a fair
this
amount
is
of back and forth.
Yeah, this is complicated.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. So let me here switch the slide to the next one. So when looking at which, it's not letting me advance the slide. Here we go. Here we go. Okay. So when looking at this one, we really were being very careful to understand, is this really in the shoreline overlay, and if so, how? And what you'll see is this is Six Mile Creek, which runs between Marsh Lake and Wasserman Lake. And along this creek or tributary, there is what appears to be wetland area, but which is in reality classified as a recreational development lake. And so that is the area from which that 1,000-foot buffer is applied. And so that is what is causing this development to be within this shoreland overlay area. So just to be very clear, that is what we're looking at when we're confirming the presence in the shoreland overlay.
It's still a wetland, though, just to be clear. It's still a regulated wetland that the Watershed District and Lennar did a massive wetland restoration project to a few years back when we built Lakeside Drive and impacted the wetland to the north.
So when we're looking at planned unit developments in the shoreland overlay area, we are required to basically meet a couple different criteria. In this case, there is a density determination which the city has to make, and what that entails is a review of the density of the project in certain tiers from the lake or the water body to which the shoreline overlay is established. And so in this case, from that, we'll call it a lake, we're establishing different tiers at a distance of, I think it's 267 feet in this case, and we're looking at the density in each of those tiers. The city can actually approve more density than the base density in tiers that are further away from the water. In this case, the city does not have to do that because this project meets the base density that's allowed in the shoreline overlay. So the staff interpretation is that this project meets the density determination. It's acceptable. The next required criteria is that the project meets the 50% open space requirement. And so that is a standard to which the developer has requested variance. They're proposing 30% open space on the project as opposed to 50%. In looking at the development, you can see kind of why they are proposing 30% as opposed to 50%. Part of the reason is that they have to actually meet the city's density goals, which requires them to have enough lots to have the net density that they need to have. So another thing that takes away from the open space that they can have is actually the requirement to have a buffer, which we'll talk about in a second. That would kind of buffer the development from Marsh Lake Road, which is the future county roadway. So moving to the next slide, the shoreland variance. The other standard that they're requesting a variance to is the impervious surface. In this case, they're proposing an overall area that is 34% impervious, but in all reality, what they're actually requesting is a 4,500 square foot maximum per lot. That comes out to, on the smallest lots, something like 54% of the lot would be impervious, but again, not all of the lots would be at that. So what staff is proposing that the variance be for is to allow for 4,500 square feet per lot.
How many of the lots would be that small?
There are a handful. I don't have a specific count of each of those lots in handy for this presentation, but we can certainly provide that information should it be necessary. I just want to make sure I cover everything here. So the findings of fact. So the city has to make findings of fact to support an approval of the variance. These are findings of fact that are similar to any variance that you would approve. They're also the ones that are in the state statute. And so staff are proposing findings that are consistent with those because staff find that this project kind of meets that practical difficulty test. So first of all, the proposed land use is compliant with the city's zoning code and the comprehensive plan. It's a residential development. Practical difficulties in this particular case arise from one of the things, which is the requirement to extend Red Fox Drive through this development. And two is also the same, connect also Timber Terrace is what I wanted to say. And then the second bullet point would be that the city buffer requirements actually also limit the amount of open space and that this development can have. The development has to be complementary to surrounding development, and looking at the standards that are proposed, it is consistent with those Laketown developments. And lastly, this determination is not solely based on cost. So those are the findings that are being proposed for the variance and what the city will have to adopt should it wish to approve. Okay, so really quickly, I want to talk about buffers. The city has a requirement for properties to be buffered from Marsh Lake Road. In this case, what you're looking at is a 40-foot landscaped buffer off of Marsh Lake Road and a 15-foot landscape buffer off of Red Fox Drive access. So that has been provided for in this development. In addition, the buffer plantings that are proposed do appear to meet the unit and species count that the city has in the ordinance. What does that buffer look like? Well, you've seen it, I think, already implemented, but in this case, a cross-section has been provided. You'll see those plantings that are proposed on a berm, which is also provided in this area, consistent with the city code. And then you'll have the houses buffered between Marsh Lake Road. So tree preservation and landscaping, really quickly. Again, there will be some tree removals on this. 34 out of the 41 existing trees on site. That would necessitate 30 trees to be planted. This development is planting 269 trees. Not all of them qualify, but certainly those required mitigations have been met. One thing that we wanted to note was there is one sort of unique lot, and just for the record, the interpretation is that this particular lot, which initially the developer was requesting to have some of an abutting city outlot be basically granted to them to allow for a standard lot. That can't happen because of a conservation easement. That's basically, it's a challenging conservation easement to remove. So the interpretation here is that this is still a buildable lot. It will be a little bit unique in terms of its shape, but the setbacks are shown on the screen here, and it will meet with those setbacks that are shown on the screen.
So the lot in question is this lot 5.
Yeah, lot 5, that is correct. So a side yard line would be seen kind of on that area where the cursor is hovering over. That would kind of feed into the rear yard area. The rear yard would be established from this line here on the north side of the property. So sort of a unique lot. So I'm going to hand it back to Kara to talk about transportation and access and other things engineering.
Thank you. That was a nice break. Nathan already highlighted the key connections, but just wanted to note here again that the plan includes the extension of Red Fox Drive, so that's the collector we were discussing earlier, through to Marsh Lake Road. You'll note that there are no proposed driveways accessing directly onto Red Fox Drive, so consistent with our standard there. The thing that, in response to one of the questions that was asked, they are required to dedicate additional right-of-way for a collector road, so it does have a wider, not just a wider roadway footprint, but the right-of-way that they dedicate for the collector is wider to accommodate those potential joint pedestrian uses on both sides. And then connection back to the existing temporary cul-de-sac on Catkin. And then the one other item that I did want to note is that they are showing, and this feeds back into that open space conversation too a little bit, they are dedicating an additional 75 feet of right-of-way. It's not additional. It varies what the net math is, but they're dedicating 75 feet of right-of-way for the future county road so that we have adequate right-of-way for whatever we end up building there in the future. And this slide just takes us back to that connection. What I did want to note here specific to this parcel, and before we move on to the next slide, is that, so the city has been talking about when these remaining connections from all of these houses here can happen to Marsh Lake Road. So I get phone calls from residents wondering whether there's going to be additional ways in and out of those neighborhoods, just due to safety concerns with cars passing by their house. So Creekside Drive will eventually connect to Marsh Lake Road if and when this property owner decides to sell their property for development. This is our Red Fox connection, and then Timber Terrace will connect at some point as well. So the City Council, in response to concerns that were being generated by particularly property owners up in the intersection of Hackmore and Bridle, with concerns about just the sheer volume of traffic that's coming through this intersection, folks looking to see one of these two connections implemented. So at the time, the City Council did authorize us to begin preliminary design to look at the city potentially completing the extension of Timber Terrace. Now, Timber Terrace is not a collector. It's a residential street that would allow for driveways to be located on it and houses to be directly abutting it. But the city had identified this as being a more viable connection for the city to explore on its own without development, because we put sewer and water, trunk sewer and water, in this location along the lot line between the Schmieg property and the Simon property. We were able to obtain easements from those folks to put the pipes in the ground. And those two landowners at the time expressed a willingness to entertain discussion with the city should the city look to construct Timber Terrace in this location ahead of development. So we started that design work. We put $500,000 in the budget to do that. And we started to work through the design, and we're running into some challenges with moving forward with construction, in that what we would be building would start to impact the developability of those two adjacent properties. So we don't know where
what kind of houses might want to be built along that road. So we, as an example, wouldn't be able to install sanitary sewer and water services for individual lots that would have the right to access that road without the property being platted and a development proposal coming forward showing what kind of lots people would want in that area. Additionally, constructing the road through this area would potentially have an impact on standing water on the farm property, so that, you know, the farming operation isn't regulated from a water perspective. They can drain tile their way into areas not being wet. But building a road through that location was likely going to result in some potential additional flooding of farmland. And you can imagine that the Schmiegs weren't necessarily too excited about that prospect. They didn't tell us no. We hadn't reached the point of seizing easement negotiations, but what then transpired was the Kelsers communicating to the city that they were looking to sell their land. So prior to relatively recently, the Kelsers had been communicating to us that they intended to continue farming that land. And so once the opportunity came along to potentially see the Red Fox Drive collector connection constructed, certainly having a secondary access in this point would alleviate the concerns that our fire chief has about limited access to the area, as well as residents being concerned about congestion at this access. So Red Fox would provide another outlet for an area, and certainly with construction of the roundabout at 11 and 5, that would create a safe way to access 11 compared to Hackmore. So from that perspective, we started to see an opportunity to potentially shift the money that we had budgeted for Timber Terrace, which is $500,000, to cost share in this project. So specifically, this really section of Red Fox is benefiting the community as a whole. The property owner would be able to facilitate the construction of these 4 lots simply by looping back to the existing Red Fox and Timber Terrace. There wouldn't be anything in our requirements that would require them to have a connection to Marsh Lake Road. Additionally, these lots on Catkin could be constructed with an access from Marsh Lake Road and all be built. It really is the construction of this segment through this portion of the property that is proposed that benefits the community as a whole, and not just these 22 lots that are shown here. So staff, the conversation to date with the developer is that we would look at the prospect of shifting the $500,000 that we had budgeted for Timber Terrace over to here. And the way that gets solidified is as the project would move through to the final plat process and development of a final development agreement is where we would work through the details of that cost participation. What I do want to note is that we wouldn't then also go build Timber Terrace. Timber Terrace would remain unconnected through the Schmieg and Simon property until such time as those properties were to develop, and then that connection would occur with development at no cost to the city. We typically don't, I'm not aware of a situation where staff would be recommending cost participation in a local residential street. But the critical nature of this Red Fox connection is what's resulting in staff to have a recommendation that the city participate, because it benefits the neighborhood as a whole.
Can I ask a question quick?
Surely.
Can you go back one slide? I was just curious, I don't remember, was there a reason other than they wanted to build houses there that if it was that critical to get a road to Marsh Lake, that Bridle didn't run through past Catkin right to, like, was there a reason that wasn't?
That's a great question. There was. So Simultaneously, we also were looking at the access spacing guidelines for future Marsh Lake Road. So whether it's a city road or a county road, the access spacing is important to understand from a safety perspective when you're talking about a road that in 20, 30, 40, 50 years is going to have significantly more traffic than it has on it today. So concurrently, we were working on the access spacing. These Lake Town 11th, 12th, 13th, 14th, 15th, and 16th were in process. So staff was working to balance those things. But when they submitted their application for the 16th edition, the Schmiegs were not supportive of an access at this location because it would have put the roadway really shining directly into their farmstead. And so they were requesting to see that moved. And then the access spacing wasn't quite working from the county road layout. And then thirdly, a little bit in the weeds, but if you've looked at it, there's a ton of topography from Marsh Lake Road down to the other side of Lake Town 16th. So we have a berm, we have a super tall retaining wall. We were having trouble facilitating that connection simply from a technical perspective because the road was either getting way too steep, so steeper than we would allow, or the sanitary sewer was getting ridiculously deep. So we couldn't even technically get the connection to work. So the conclusion that we landed was this alternative access spacing plan that was agreeable to the Schmiegs. We were in the middle of working on the Marsh Lake Road project at the time, so there was extensive public engagement that landed us where we landed.
Thank you.
Just one other note with the connectivity of the roads includes connectivity of pedestrian facilities. So the existing trail along Red Fox would continue, and then sidewalks are proposed on one side of the street consistent with city standard. Utilities, sewer and water would be extended to the neighborhood. Stubs were provided from the adjacent two properties to serve this area. The water would get looped, which is just an important part of any water system. We want to try to loop the system where we can. They do have some minor revisions that need to be made to their infrastructure plans to meet city standards, but none of them were significant. And then certainly stormwater management, we talked about that in detail. They are subject to the Minnehaha Creek Watershed District rules. They have made application. They've gotten preliminary comments back from the Watershed District that they'll be working through. But they typically would wait to get through this approval before they start diving into the details that necessitate modifications to meet their rules.
All right, and it's back to me.
Mr. First.
So parkland dedication. So we have reviewed for this, as we do with development review and preliminary plats. When we do this, we obviously look to the city's comprehensive plan in terms of guidance on where parks are supposed to be located in undeveloped land. In this case, you'll see on the right side of the screen the future park search area map, and I've put a red arrow approximately where this development is. You'll note that the green arrows, they're circles on there, rather. Those are sort of the general areas where the city envisions a park being located. Obviously, these are more guidance as opposed to prescriptive, specific, precise locations. That's because, developments definitely, there are a number of different challenges, obviously, with various areas. And so having a general area that we want to locate a park in is a lot more flexible for development as it occurs. So in this case, staff identified that cash in lieu of parkland dedication would be the preferred method. In part, this is because it's a small development. 10% of the land area is going to result in a pretty small park. And generally speaking, cities don't want to do real small parks because they can be just more of a maintenance obligation. That being said, in this case, there's also a lot of other things that the ordinance is looking to have happen, such as open space. A cash fee is supported by staff here. So that is kind of the parkland dedication recommendation. I would mention that Lakeside Estates Park is within a half mile, and the city's comprehensive plan does guide that there should be access approximately every half mile for residents to have a park. So there's a direct trail connection to an existing park facility that these residents would have access to. Further reinforcing potential future need for a park should the Marsh Lake Hunt Club land be developed in the future, having a park for those residents so they don't have to cross Marsh Lake Road. The Planning Commission held a public hearing for this item on April 18th. There were a number of residents in attendance to learn about the proposed development. There were questions asked about the roadway improvements in general, but also for Katkinwayne specific. Concerns that were raised about stormwater impacts and drainage of water across this project area onto adjacent properties. And lastly, concerns were raised with the removal of existing wetlands generally in the city, but also specific to the project. The Planning Commission had a number of different areas that it discussed. Those included wetland, stormwater, and drainage impacts, shoreland standards from its shoreland overlay, traffic impacts of this particular development, but also broadly across the surrounding neighborhoods. And some of those things were already discussed by the city engineer this evening. Intersection controls specifically at the location of Red Fox Drive and Marsh Lake Road. There were questions about the temporary turnaround and revisions that have happened to these plans over time. So the end result of the Planning Commission's discussion was a 6-to-1 recommendation to the City Council for a conditional approval of this project. There were 4 additional conditions that were proposed by the Planning Commission to be added to this project should it be approved by the City Council. Staff have not recommended that those be carried forward because we believe that they have actually already been addressed by the applicant or will be addressed by the applicant or may not be an issue. So we can walk through those if you would like. Those were laid out for you in the staff report. The staff recommendation, so as mentioned, this project is really trying to balance a lot of different requirements. There's roadway and utility connections, there's density obligations, there's shoreland standards and all of those things. Staff is supportive of this request generally because it meets the city's adopted plans to the best that it can and requests flexibility where it is needed. And therefore are recommending approval with conditions. Those conditions are on the screen here and were in your report. I would note that they are relatively standard, and so I can talk about them if you would like me to in more detail. So with all of that said, we have a sample motion on the screen for you should you wish to move this project forward. I would note that the developer has waited patiently through this long presentation and would be eager to address your questions, and we are also happy to stand for those at this time.
All right, thank you to both you and Kara. Council questions? Member Roberts.
I don't have any questions. I think it really comes down to how important is Red Fox Road, right? Like is it a perfect development? Maybe not, right? It's not hitting a lot of our standards. I know how much Councilman Gunnarsson and Ivansky love their side yard setbacks and their rear yard setbacks. But I don't really know what else we can really do on this property. So to me, it's either it just sits and it's nothing and we don't have Red Fox Road, or we do something like this, because I with everything that you guys talked about, right? Like there's a lot of challenges with this property. So I think that's really the decision, right? Like it's how important is Red Fox Road, and based off of everything they shared with us, it's an important connection for that area.
Question. So I think one of the things that seems easy to me is to say, let's take out one of the lots. If we take out one of the lots, then the density is not met. Is that correct? Like instead of 22, what if we do 20 lots?
So Mayor, to answer your question, I think the minimum number of lots that would allow this development to meet its goal, I think there would be, I want to say it's like 19 or 20 lots would be what the development needs to have. And, I think the developer probably would want to speak to what, if any, lots should be removed. There may be, within specifically just strictly looking at net density, the ability to remove a couple lots. But
Okay.
certainly a conversation to have.
Love to have your comments on that, please. And if you would state your name for the record, please.
Thank you, Mayor, council members. I'm Brian Tucker with Summergate Development. We're based out of Lakeville, and I have John Bender from Westwood with me. I'd venture to say both John and I have probably sat through much longer council meetings before, so no worries on that. I appreciate your consideration. This is a case where I think staff did a great job of explaining all the different constraints with this property. Are all those constraints unique? Maybe not, but you're adding all of them into a fairly small package. And the collector road is, the need for it's been identified pretty strongly. But the reality is there's a large section of it going through our site that we can't access it, we can't put lots against it. So what I would say is our ultimate goal was obviously to meet all the city expectations in terms of connecting to all 5 connection points, which is a little bit unique for a 12-acre property, accommodating the additional right-of-way, accommodating Red Fox Road or Drive, and also trying to come up with a lot configuration, lot sizes that are as compatible with the neighborhood as we could get. So our initial foray at Planning Commission was our side setbacks were inadequate, and we understood that. So by bumping those up to 8 feet, essentially these lots are gonna look identical to what's next door in Lake Town, which is 8-foot setbacks. Our pad size is 50 feet, so we're 4 feet short on lot width compared to neighboring Lennar. What I would say is regarding losing lots, I know every developer is going to say we don't want to do that. The reality is here, there's a disproportionate amount of infrastructure needed, a disproportionate amount of area that's taken out of our developable area. I think by our calculation, about 40% of it is taken out to accommodate all these things, including existing wetland, which we have to work around. So that said, we also had to get to a critical mass of lots to even make this pencil out and make it financeable, for a loan, to get a loan for this property. So there's a number of things. If we had to remove 2 lots, it wouldn't pencil. There's just no way, unless the city were to come to the table with maybe additional contributions for the road. And I think what's been presented here this evening seems like a fair approach, or at least proportionate, and we can certainly have those discussions. But all that said, that would really hurt this project in this particular case, just because it's not very big to begin with. If we were looking at 80 acres, that's a whole different discussion. But the reality is, if you look at the layout, there's no other layout that works on this property. I mean, usually you come into a development with at least a few options, and you can have your design guy go in and figure out every possible means of getting lot yield and getting all the roads in there. But here, based on those connection points, it is what it is. So it makes it easy in one way and challenging in many others. So with that said, I'm happy to answer any other questions as well.
All right, thank you for that. Council, questions?
Well, if there's questions, there's comments that I'd say. We've talked about impervious surface problems with this project from the onset when it first landed as an application to Planning Commission. So it's not just simply a question of side yard setbacks. I want to make that clear, that there's been a number of objections about this. There's a lot about this project that is disagreeable. We're being asked to have variance to shoreland requirements, which are designed to protect areas that surround the existing properties and waterways. I suspect that Lot 5 is going to create a number of complications going forward with that irregular shape. We talked at the beginning of this process about the enforcement problems about encroaching into outlots and other areas. We probably will see that with this over time. The number of the access to a park, half a mile is a very long way, especially for new families that are going to be in here. The buffers that are causing the problems that are causing the variances requests, that's reality. This is what's needed for this parcel on this land. So I share the Planning Commission's recommendation about contributing to the roadway costs. We've had other developments where we've wanted roadways extended, have made the developers fund the costs of those roadways to get the development done. You know, if this is going to be a barrier to this project and it dies, then that's a question that we have to resolve amongst us council here. But that seems to me like a place we should start and then work our way back up to the level of discomfort with how much variance that we're going to have, and is that going to be something that we're comfortable with doing? So with that, I think it bears additional discussion.
Councilmember Gunderson, please.
Kara, how likely is this gonna flood with an increase in impervious surface? And the reason for impervious surface is to manage runoff from rainwater and snow melt. So did we just shift a potential flood zone to the north from the roads, or south of that?
Sure, so do we have a slide that shows yeah. So the development is required to construct stormwater management facilities to provide flood control, so rate control and water quality control. And those systems are designed based off their proposed impervious surface. So they have to mitigate what they're proposing to add through their impervious surface as part of their stormwater management package. And so the watershed district and the district's engineers that they have as consultants review their proposed stormwater model to make sure that they're not having a negative effect off-site from their development. So they specifically would include that proposed impervious surface in their design for the stormwater system.
So we are minimal potential for that then?
Yeah, so they're required to not increase the rate of runoff from the site, so not contribute to downstream flooding or add additional phosphorus loading to.
And over time, we think that'll hold up?
That is what we do on every one of these developments. So certainly it would be mindful for me to put in a plug that we have to maintain these stormwater facilities that get constructed so that they continue to function.
Thank you. Councilmember Gunderson, any other thoughts?
Do we have an idea of how much open space, less of a variance is needed? If, for instance, lot 5, which is the lot with the strange encroachment into the other parcel, if that's removed, and does that allow us to have less of a variance and increase open space, deal with the questions of permeability or impervious surfaces?
Yeah, so to answer your question, Councilmember, that's a kind of multi-part question. I think the first part of it was, if we remove a lot, will that increase the amount of open space in the development, therefore reduce the variance needed? The answer to that would be yes. Now, the nuanced version of that answer is what percent of the open space would this development have if a lot were removed? I don't think that it would, really meaningfully contribute to the amount of open space provided by the development. It still need to have a variance for a certain percent, but certainly that variance would be less to a degree. The second part was about impervious surface, and with developments such as this one, we're looking at each lot individually, and so there would still need to be a variance to impervious surface for any lots that are exceeding their, I think it's either 25 or 30% in the city code. So there would still be a variance request for impervious surface as well.
But in some instances, the impervious surfaces, these lots are double what the shoreland requirements are and double what our standard just R1 zoning, correct?
Yeah, that is accurate. Yep.
Councilmember Rife.
Yeah, going back to your one slide on Red Fox, you have a little red. How long is that part of Red Fox, that extension? There you go, right there. What is that? I can visualize it. I'm just trying to, when I'm over there. Okay.
Councilmember Gunderson, you have something?
Just a slippery slope to go down when we expand, when we start looking at subsidizing something that would be coming along with development. I think over time that would not be a good precedent to set. While yes, this is a flawed area, I don't think it's the developers, it's not the developers, I mean, they didn't create the problem just is with this lot what it is. And they came back and they've taken our recommendations to keep a side yard setback. It's just, it's difficult, but I think the precedent setting potential, it would not be something that would be in our best interest in the long term. And
You're talking specifically about paying for part of the Red Fox, yeah.
paying for part of Red Fox, that as I understand, the developer would be paying to do with this particular section of road. So in the future, I just don't think it would be. I think we're taking something that we don't particularly like, and we have a lot there that yes, we'd have to, I don't want to say micromanage, but at least make the homeowners aware that it's an irregular lot and encroaching into it it will be an issue. So for me, right now, benefit of a connection outweighs just a tough piece of land. And without setting a precedent that I just don't think would be, again, is in our best interest. And that's just me. But I think in the long run, it helps us more than it hurts us.
Yeah, and I mean, we can certainly make a case that this is a very specific and a very special case. I guess I'm not objecting to moving our road money from Catkin Way, right? Timber Terrace over to connect Red Fox, but I have some significant heartburn over that Lot 5. And I think that is, if we could trade out Lot 5 for that stretch of road, right, that to me feels like a nice compromise.
So, Mayor, staff's bringing us then a recommendation on diverting the funds that we have slated for expansion of Timber Terrace to essentially realign that to this Red Fox extension. I like the Planning Commission's recommendation that developer pay for it all, but if we're gonna divert these funds, I would recommend that we have that as a stop loss on this, that the 500,000 that Kara talks about is the largest contribution that the city will make to extending that, and if 500,000 doesn't get it done, then the developer has to figure out where they're going to pay for the rest, and if it's less than 500,000, then the city should be only subsidizing up to what would be its 50% share. How does council feel about that?
I think that's agreeable. This is the amount of money we have to contribute, and that's as much. Anything under that, we'll contribute that. Yeah, I feel like that works for me.
I have a question
Councilmember
about the
Roberts.
Lot 5. So we've seen in other developments, right, where with where for whatever reason it was a bad, not a great lot, right? And I think in the past, right, a lot of times it ends up moving to the city, and we recently sold one, right? So, I mean, is that typical, like how that's usually done? Is that an agreement with the developer? If they can't sell a lot, then it transfers to how does that, because I know that happened, like we sold a lot because it couldn't be sold by the developer.
Does anybody, I'm trying to remember the circumstances. Ms. Hardy, do you have
I'm trying to remember, yeah, I'm trying to remember the exact circumstances, but I believe those lots used to be in a community land trust and had different
They had some different
requirements.
requirements around it. Yeah, I think you're right.
I just didn't know if like that lot, right, it's odd shaped, if people don't want, I mean, they'll see it, right? When they go there, they're gonna know the lot is what it is, but if for some reason it doesn't sell, like how does that?
I'd like to see the lot go away and have a little bit more elbow room on the remaining lots, personally.
This one is just weird because the easement that's in question is called a ring easement. So it was an easement that was put in place through some sort of deal with the landowner who used to own the land that is Lake Town 16th and the state. So it's really restrictive. So on this other, that's why you have kind of a weird lot on the Lennar side. So the other ones are kind of longer. So staff ended up having them pull the lot line back here to make enforcement more effective because, to everybody's point, people aren't gonna know that their lot line does that. So they're gonna wanna encroach into it. But it's a historical easement that's just unique. That's all I'm saying is I don't know that we have any more of these in the city. But
If we're making it go away, what's the cost on that lot?
Please.
Just to give a little
Mr.
history.
Tucker,
So
please.
Nathan, I don't know if you can point out, there's a couple of outlots that we're actually acquiring from Lennar that were left over from the Lake Town 17th. There's that one, and then that one. And so those help to kind of, at least create enough buildable area, get some lots in here. And then again, our proposal was to square off that corner so we didn't run into issues with, a homeowner that was confused about property lines. But given staff's explanation about just the process of actually being able to even make that acquisition possible, we decided not to pursue that. We did look at just ignoring the Lennar outlot and having a more rectangular lot, or a more pie-shaped lot, if you will. It would be a smaller pad size, but then you start running into impervious. It'd be even more impervious than what was proposed. So we have been talking to a national builder that's interested in these lots. We made them aware of this one just because they have the experience of, can we market this? Can we, actually get a house on this lot? So they have reviewed it, and they said as long as the pad size is adequate to accommodate their typical footprints, they're less concerned about the irregular property line. They've seen it elsewhere. I was in public sector as a planner for 20 years, so I certainly understand the concern about neighbors that don't understand where my property line is and that whole incentive to want to encroach. So in a lot of cases, it's signage and things like that that are necessary to make sure that they understand that that's a conservation easement. That would apply anywhere you have a conservation easement. So, so I think there's ways around it. I certainly understand your concern that it's not a regular shaped lot. But again, we're just trying to make the most of the property and get that critical mass of lots is all we're trying to accomplish. So thank you.
Thank you.
I did, actually, Councilmember Gunderson, you asked about the impervious, how many lots would push that 53% envelope? I think you asked that earlier. By our count, it's about 5. I will add that impervious, when you look at the pad sizes that are on these lots, those are always worst case scenario. But obviously the impervious includes driveway, and you always want to accommodate a future patio because you don't want a homeowner coming in and finding out, oh, I can put in a 15 square foot patio and that's it. So So that's a worst case scenario. That doesn't mean every house that goes in is gonna come anywhere near that 53%. But on about 5 of those interior lots, they would be maybe more inclined to hit that 50 if you had a typical sized home. The other ones would be less than that, obviously.
Thank you. All right, council, other questions?
I mean, I share your, I still think we have heartburn about that lot. I think we're gonna see encroachment at some point, where this property line, while it's measured 30 feet back to that back corner, we will probably have this lot come before planning commission and council for a variance in the next 5 to 10 years about how I can't build a deck because through no fault of the homeowner, they need a variance to this, and the reality is that council is seeing at this point in time that something could be been done to prevent having to go through that variance process.
Agreed. All right, other questions, comments, council? All right, seeing no further discussion, I will entertain a motion.
So how, I mean, we've talked about changing it, right? So I don't, like, how would, like, would there be conditions that?
Yeah,
right,
can we
like,
put some
I-
conditions on
like, how
a
does that work?
motion? How does that work? Who can advise us on that?
You can conditionally approve, so you could add an additional, a 10th condition. So staff is recommending 9. You could add a 10th condition, basically requiring removal of lot 5 if that were the direction that the council wanted to go.
All right, I'm going to take a crack at this. Can I? I make a motion that we move to adopt Resolution 2023, approving the preliminary plat, preliminary PUD, and shoreline variances requested for Hunter's Glen, with the findings and conditions therein, and adding a provision that they get rid of one lot, probably that lot 5. Concerning. All right, does that make sense to everybody?
Mayor, we also asked for a condition concerning the city's stop loss to the construction of Red Fox Road and the diversion of funds from the Timber Terrace.
Thank you. I will take that as a friendly amendment to add the amount of our contribution to Red Fox Road not to exceed the $500,000, is it $500,000 budgeted? Thank you. I'll take that as a friendly amendment.
Second?
We have a motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Congratulations.
Thanks, gentlemen.
You moved one more step forward. Thank you. And that, my friends, concludes our regular agenda. So we'll move on to reports and emerging issues. Attorney Vos, you're up first.
Mayor and council, I feel like I've reported on marijuana a lot, which is unfortunate for me, but as council probably knows, there's now a House bill and a Senate bill that have passed, and so the legislature ends its session May 22nd, I want to say. And that bill, or those bills, are now in conference committee, and it's expected that they'll get worked out. And I guess what's to report, and I've talked to staff about this, is that cities will have some authority over legalized recreational marijuana, that is marijuana that's not what was legalized last go-around, which was a relatively low level. This would be full strength. This would be not 3.2 marijuana. This would be full-strength marijuana. And cities will have limited authority over the conditions under which that is sold and consumed. In effect, cities will have no authority to say no permanently to that. You'll have some authority over where retail sales occur and the conditions under which they occur, but you won't be able to say no in your community, except that both bills do allow for, we've talked about this in the past, a moratorium to be imposed while you sort of figure it out. And I think there is a view that because this is very likely to pass and very likely to pass in the next couple of weeks, there's going to be a large number of cities that are going to do that. The moratorium could run through the beginning of 2025, so it could be a relatively long moratorium. And I think there'll be a large number of cities that are going to take a look at doing that to sort of figure out what the rules of the game are going to look like, how taxation is part of this proposed law, how that's going to be done, how it's going to be accounted for. I've just wanted to let staff know that, because if the law does pass and get signed by the governor has said he'll sign it, the time period to adopt a moratorium will be short. So I suspect that if that happens, staff will be back at least with the option in front of you to do that, or to talk about doing that. I don't know that staff's going to have a strong recommendation. I guess we haven't talked about whether there will be a staff recommendation about that, but that will be something that probably gets plopped in front of you if the law passes as is expected, so that you can discuss amongst yourselves whether you want to put things on hold while you figure out the rules of the game.
Quick question on that. Is smoking ban, is it written in a way where it's not exclusive to tobacco? Like, would that include marijuana then, like for in restaurants? And
Yeah, Mayor and Council, there's no reason to believe, and there's nothing in the bills that would exempt smoking marijuana. You can appreciate that recreational marijuana is consumed in other ways now, but smoking it would not be exempt from or treated differently under the various indoor smoking prohibitions.
Thank you. All right. Anything else, Attorney?
I don't. No, thanks, Mayor.
All right. Ms. Hardy, anything from staff?
Thank you, Mayor. I don't have anything, but our city clerk does have one thing that she would like to share with you this evening.
Ms. Edisfold, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and members of the council. We have a new art collection as our ongoing collaboration with Zeller Studios. This collection is known as Art Symmetry. This collection is watercolors by 8 different artists, and they will be on display till the end of May. We welcome the public to come and view this beautiful collection during business hours, Monday through Friday, 8 to 4:30 p.m. These paintings are available for purchase, and we could provide the contact information of the artist.
All right. Thank you. Again, and thank you to that great collaboration with Zeller Studios. We appreciate that. Council, any reports from council?
I would just say,
Yeah, Councilmember
it's getting late, so I'll be quick. I believe last Thursday was the last Citizens Academy day, so just my wife attended. I know it was a good group, so thank you to the staff for all the hard work that they did putting together all the stuff for the Citizens Academy. It would be nice if we could make all new residents do that, right? So they learn how to do it, but unfortunately we can't do that. So, but I encourage people to sign up next year.
Yeah. And thank you to all who did attend. The staff does an amazing job on that. It's a really good way to spend some time. All right, council, any other?
None from me, Mayor.
All right, seeing none, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn?
Second?
We have a motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? We stand adjourned.